Hello my friends and welcome to episode 24 of Long War of the Chosen. Now this episode is going to be an AAR and a bit of an explainer actually. So what's an AAR? Well, any of you who have been in the military will know that when something goes wrong, sometimes even when something doesn't go wrong, but after a campaign is completed and the result was not exactly what we wanted to have, we can have an after action report where we just basically sit down and we look at everything that happened, see how we can improve what we did right, what we did wrong, really sit down and dig deep into everything that happened, you know, everything that we're doing, etc. Now, this is coming after a couple of days of sitting on the end of the campaign, episode 23, cooling off period. And I just wanted to, in those days, I've just done a lot of research. I just wanted to understand whether I'm just being frustrated and salty or whether this game genuinely has genuine problems. And believe me, we're going to get to that latter one. So, before we begin, I said a lot of things in the 22nd and 23rd episodes about how I felt that the design of the mod was very poor and was falling, it just wasn't fun. That the bottom line is, it just wasn't fun at all. Putting aside whether I was doing all the right things on the strategic layer or whether I was doing all the right things in combat, it wasn't fun because of the RNG and the damage mechanics were really annoying to me. And the fact that they removed cover destruction from grenades, I mean, that's fine. We can cope with that being the new paradigm. It does take a pretty big part of the game away. But then they also made it such that almost every weapon in the game has a very, very poor minimum damage value. And for whatever functions of the mechanics, it always seems to find that low damage value most of the time. And what that does is that drags out the length of the engagement, which means that there's more time for reinforcements to come, which means that there's more chance of a cascading squad wipe. And because of the issues with the beacon, a cascading squad wipe is almost guaranteed if things start going wrong. It's not like you can just throw the beacon down, have one or two turns wait, maybe lose a guy or two, and get out and carry on with your campaign. With, 5, 6, 7 turns plus evac times, you're pretty much guaranteed to lose the whole squad. That's, you'll face at least 2, if not 3 waves of reinforcements in that time. And the thing is, if everything's gone right and you're just waiting for extraction, that's not a problem. I mean, it could be a problem, but it's a problem that you should be able to handle. It's when things are going wrong, so you're already in trouble and you're trying to get away from trouble, it just confirms the full squad wipe. Now, anyway, I spoke about a feedback thread. I've done a lot of research on the game since then. There are very few videos of this on the latest version out there. You can actually tell which version of the mod people are using because in the earlier versions of the mod, when you start, your resistance members will be 2 on supply, 2 on recruit, and 2 on intel gathering. And they just did away with the pretension that you have any choice in the latest version because it starts with all 6 members on intel, but we'll come to that. Anyway, going back to the thread, I was reading through the thread and there's this really excellent bit of feedback which I wanted to show you guys. Because when I'm looking through feedback, not everyone can articulate what's really wrong. But there's one person who actually, I think, really understands the issues, and it's good to not feel alone when you're assessing something, when you're looking at a situation. It's good to not feel alone in your assessment. Because if you're the only person who thinks a certain thing and everyone else thinks something else, You could still be right, don't get me wrong. 100 people can be wrong and one person can be correct. You know, if that one person is a physicist and 100 people are, you know, whatever, not physicists, the physicist could be absolutely right. Very counterintuitive position that's actually correct, and the 100 other people can be wrong. That's not the issue. But anyway, I wanted to bring it up because it's articulated very well. So we'll start with the beginning. Okay, so here is the post which I saw here, and I'll just read this. I'll read some of this here. I have to actually interact with it to scroll it. But let's start with the very beginning. We're not going to read all of this, but there are certain bits of it that are absolutely what I want to talk about. Come on, OBS, you're killing me. Okay, for some reason OBS does not want to give me the ability to interact with it today. 1 second. I wonder if there's something wrong with my keys. Okay, well, anyway. Let me just see if I can do something else to get this to work properly. Something about having XCOM running is making it go mental. Okay, right, well, let's just exit XCOM to desktop temporarily. That's not a problem. Okay, so let's get back to what we were talking about. So he says here, since my opinion of this mod is not very positive, I want to preface this post by saying that I totally respect the enormous amount of work that has been poured into this project by Provonis. I'm going to presume that Provonis is the Long War II team. Okay. Point number 1. This mod seems to play almost like a puzzle game that is clearly not meant to be the case. There might be a single way to get through Long War II. There might not be a single way to get through Long War II, but there is definitely a pretty rigid sequence of steps that the players must be sure to implement as soon as possible for his XCOM resistance to survive at least a few months. Now, here's the thing. When I first started playing this, I was like thinking, oh, you know, there's a lot of strategic depth to this, and that's going to be cool and interesting. You know, we can do a bit of searching for missions, we can do a bit of gathering supplies. You know, as long as we get an early engineer and scientist, then it's not a problem, and we can always just buy one if we need to buy one, we can just buy one. Okay, not a problem. However, the issue is that there actually is you have no choice at all, and this guy has come to the same conclusion as I have. You have no choice at all on the strategic map. So if I just, I'm just reloading the game here. If I just toggle off the browser here, and we load up any game on the Geoscape. The issue is that you have to basically focus liberate regions, but we'll talk about that in a second. So here's an old save game. Okay, so when you are when you first started, or whatever, you have your whole team on intel, and you really have no choice in the matter. You have to have your whole team on intel to find missions to generate the resources that you need. So you have no choice. So any other strategy or anything else that you could possibly do is a trap, effectively. You can only run intel. Now, here's the thing. When these stats here, strength, vigilance, and F, I think is like force or something. But here's how they work. Strength is the amount of enemies in the region, so it's the chance that there will be missions that have more enemies. It only controls quantity. And vigilance is how much Advent wants to increase the quantity in a region. But the other one, F, is actually the tech level that Advent is at. And you can't interact with that in any way. Their tech level is just going to increase constantly. I think it's something like every 14 days or every 16 days or something like that, their tech level is going to increase. Now what that means is that what you actually need to do, what you must do, in fact, is you must rush doing all the missions in one region and liberating it ASAP. Because once a region is liberated, there's only one way that Advent can take it back, which is they have to get at least 8 strength in the region next door, and then they have to do a particular mission, and then they have to attack the region. Which is very hard for them to do in the early game. So, once the region is liberated, you can then put your guys on supply or recruit, and they will give you supplies or recruits. And they'll do that with a bonus to like a 20 or 40% bonus to how much they're generating. But even more importantly than that, it will be much easier to clear out the faceless from that region, and you can then just move on to another region, safe in the knowledge that you have a solid income. Now, here's where it gets sort of really poor in the beginning. When you do missions, and there are various things that you can get in missions, like I don't know what this one is, I can't remember, but it's enemy material. Okay, you can get material, you can get intel, you can get scientists, you can get engineers, and you can get recruits. Now here's where the RNG creeps in. You need some of your early missions to be either an engineer or a scientist. You could potentially buy the other one from the black market, or your campaign will fail. You also have this issue where if you get a mission where you are liberating captives, it's typically 3 captives that you liberate that go to your haven that help generate intel, so you can get more missions, so you can finish the region quicker. Except there's a 20% possibility that one of them is a faceless. Now what a faceless does is they don't do the job that you set them to. So if you put them on int, they're not doing anything, they're not helping you. But they also sabotage 2 other members of your resistance. So what that means is that if you get, in the very early game when it really matters, you get 3 extra rebels and they go to your haven. If one of them is a faceless, and there's a 20% chance for each new member coming in, so you know there's probably like a 40-ish% chance that one of them's faceless. I haven't done the exact math on it. Then you've gained no benefit whatsoever, because that one faceless is not doing the job and he's sabotaging 2 other people. So that's your benefits gone straight away. And you can't tell that he's there, you can't do anything about it, because the only way to root them out is to have an advisor, which is fine, but whether they'll root it out or not is completely random. So you, in this early game, you can you need a certain sequence of things to go exactly correct for you, or you are not going to liberate the region in time, which means you're not going to have your stable income, which means you're not going to be able to have the supplies available to start buying loads of laser weapons and all that kind of stuff, which you're going to need, or mag weapons or whatever. You're going to need that stuff because once the force level hits about 3 or 4, you're going to be facing enemies that have 2 armor and like 9 HP all the time. So, and there's nothing you can do about it. You know, whether you carefully manage the force strength in various regions, whether you expand early and try not to do too much in one place or whatever, you know, all of those strategies, all of the strategies that you could possibly think of that might work, they don't work. They don't work. There's one specific way to play this game, and that is clear a region, move on to the next region. Clear that region, move on to the next region. If there's 8 strength advent next to one of your liberated regions, then you need to put that region in hiding. That's it. That's the only strategy. There's no other strategy. And you must get the early game going pretty much exactly on time, or you're not going to liberate that first region before the force level gets too high. Because in the liberate region mission, you can't, as we saw in the campaign, you cannot stealth the mission or try and do anything clever. The AI just homes in on you and stands next to you. So you got to fight them straight up. And they'll home in on you and stand next to you pretty early on in the mission. So you're going to have to face at least one wave of drop-in reinforcements as well on top. Plus the guys that are always in the network room. They won't ever leave the network room, but there's going to be some distance between the network room and when the other mobs swarm in on you. So you're going to be in that position of having to take several turns to get to the network room once you've cleaned out the enemies that have mobbed you. So there's only one way to play the strategic map. There's one exact path to victory, and by playing on Legend, you can actually see how the wheels come off the strategic map train, as it were. Because on Legend, you have to do everything in an exact way. Well, not in the base game, of course. Not in a well-balanced game. There can still be many paths to victory in a well-balanced game on the hardest difficulty, as you have seen on this channel many times. But in this game, they have designed it that everything is so tight and the moves that you need to make are so specific that if you're not following that checklist, parts of which are randomly determined, then you're going to be in huge trouble, if not in an unwinnable position. Now, the strategic side of things didn't really bother me too much, but it's just poor to me that it is so linear. Basically, there's one path to victory. That's it. The other thing I wanted to talk about, which this let's bring our friend's post up here again. So let's talk about this. Now, I'm going to skip a lot of this because I don't think it's all relevant, but here we go. Long War II Tactical Layer. Let's talk about combat now. Long War II Tactical Layer doubles down on XCOM2's erratic combat experience. The removal of the good angle bonus cuts XCOM hit chance by a lot, making all firefights extremely dangerous engagements, which would be inherently good if losing a couple of squads didn't put the player into an untenable position that can be the equivalent of a delayed game over. Now, he's not 100% engaged with what the real issue is. The real issue is that damage is unreliable in Long War. In that, you know, I would rather have a weapon that does 4 damage than a weapon that does 1 to 8 damage, right? You know this from D&D. You know this from So any number of games, reliable damage is way more valuable than, or minimum damage is way more valuable than top-end damage. Because at some point, your two 1 to 8 damage weapons are going to do 1 damage. And then you're going to do 2 damage, where you could have done 16. And then you're going to be in big trouble. And that is the issue with Long War. But he moves on to say the overemphasization, that's not a word, the overemphasis on the concealment mechanics, together with the punishing rate of reinforcements in some missions, means that a tactical situation can go south at a moment's notice, even in the absence of truly significant player mistakes. Now, this is where he's hit the issue on the nose. You can make no mistakes and be put in a bad situation. Okay, that's fine. But there are tools, there are mechanics for salvaging a bad situation, okay? Let's say 1 in 10 missions is just guaranteed to go bad. That's not a problem. That makes for immersive gameplay. As a strategist, you need to know, you need to understand when the situation's gone bad, okay, time to get out. And in this very campaign, there was a mission where I was off to rescue an engineer. Big reward. Definitely want an engineer. It started to go horribly wrong. I picked up my guys and I got out. Now on that mission, which is, you know, seems to be somewhat rare, there was already a extraction zone, so I could just run to it and get out. And that decision making is part of being a good strategy player. Now what this mod does is it takes that decision making away from you, because, as I said before, if it's starting to go wrong and you're like, okay, it's starting to go wrong, I'll back away, I'll retreat. You can't back away or retreat, because if you back away or retreat, they're just going to dump ever escalating reinforcements on your head. And in addition to that, the extraction time on every mission is so high that it pretty much guarantees that you're going to wipe. So, sort of going back to what he was saying here, let's sort of skip some of this, but here we go. Most of the time, scouting is just a non-educated guess forced by the clock. And while vanilla is being discovered early on can be just as annoying and deprive the player of the opportunity to set up an easy ambush, in Long War 2 it can be deadly. Now this, and he goes on to say, you know, an early firefight bogs the squad down with reinforcement clock starts ticking. When it happens in a mission with a fixed extraction zone, the player isn't even given the chance to abort the mission and cut his losses because he might be cut off from retreat by 2 to 3 enemy pods. The odds are so stacked against the player that if something goes south, you can be sure statistically sooner or later that it will, and if it does at the wrong time and more than once, the whole campaign may quickly follow in its full footsteps, resulting in, once again, in a ton of accumulated frustration. It's not that it makes the game hard, it's that it makes the game frustrating, while at the same time doesn't really offer that much freedom to the player. And that's the issue. This is Leon Hard here who wrote this back in 2018, but nothing's changed, it's only gotten worse. You have very little freedom in what you can do, and it's very frustrating. Now I slightly disagree with him in that I think that the missions with already deployed extraction are fine, because you could make motions to secure the extraction point a lot of the time, or almost all of the time, before you become revealed or before you engage the enemy. You can make motions to set yourself up in such a way that if that particular kind of mission goes wrong, you can get out. More so than 95% of the missions where you have to place the beacon, because the beacon takes so long, and it breaks concealment, by the way. So any of you are thinking, well, why don't you just put the beacon down right at the start? Well, one, if you put it down right at the start, then you're going to have to go back to the beginning of the map to get to it. But two, it breaks concealment. So you can only place the beacon once combat has started, and it costs you a turn. So in an ideal world, you need to beat the pod that you're fighting, then put the beacon down, then engage the next pod. In an ideal world. Or already be on top of the objective and just take a moment to plop it down. But the point is, and I'm not going to talk about the bug where the beacon constantly blew up. Okay, that's a bug, whatever, bugs happen. But the point is that the timer on it is so incredibly long that, once again, in the situation where you're starting to lose, and as a good strategic player, you say, okay, this is my Iron Man game, it's time to get out and just... The mission has gone from gaining value to preventing damage, loss prevention. You can't, at least on Legend, you can't prevent a squad wipe, a complete wipe. In almost every circumstance, that is the end result of things going wrong. Because enemies just teleport in every 2 turns, and the first reinforcement is usually relatively easy to handle, provided that you're not already under loads of pressure. But the second reinforcement, even at a relatively low force strength, is enormous. And some of those enemies, like the mechs, which sometimes come in pairs, which is ridiculous, they can actually, on the turn they arrive, immediately bombard you, doing some pretty massive AoE damage. So, yeah, it feels to me like, and this person's saying the same thing, the game has a very linear, very narrow way to play it, and eventually it's going to, through no fault of your own, force a squad wipe on you. And when it forces that squad wipe on you, if that's all your best characters with all your best gear, that's it, you've just lost. In all XCOM games, it's almost impossible to recover from a squad wipe, a complete squad wipe. Losing a character or two, not a problem. You can certainly win a campaign after that, but a complete squad wipe is almost certainly fatal to any XCOM campaign. And it should, in theory, never happen. Maybe outside of the very early game, in which case you could just restart anyway. But in this mod, they're very much forcing it. Now, the reason why I found the combat so unfun and so frustrating anyway, and this guy, I don't think he really... I don't think he really grasped entirely, because he talks in his second point about the combat, or the somewhere here he speaks about the combat mechanics, but he doesn't grasp the biggest issue with the combat, which is what made it so unfun for me, which is that they stripped away the reliability from all the weapons
got their
and just
machine working overtime. We're still seeing a steady flow of migrants heading into the cities.
I'm not sure they have to do all that much convincing at this point.
And I'm not sure I'd trade my freedom for a few hot meals and the cure for the common cold.
Well, maybe not. But what about the
These two.
terminally ill, the elderly, or the disabled? The aliens can offer them something we can't. Something most people would trade anything for.
You're wrong about that, Doctor. We can offer them freedom, even if it means they have to endure the pains of
being
I
human.
just hope they see it that way.
The pains of playing Long War. Okay. Yeah, this guy has written an excellent post, but he doesn't grasp the one reason why the combat itself feels frustrating and unfair. And that is simply that by changing the damage bands for everything, they have created a situation where, and he correctly grasped this, through no fault of the player's own decision making or skill, they can just get a load of low damage rolls, and well, guess what? Now you're in big trouble. And the funny part was, as we saw in episode 22 with the rocket, the aliens seem to be somewhat subject to the same issues, because they then also completely blundered their turn, which then allowed me to clear them up. And battles should just not look like that. They just shouldn't look like that. This is something that like 40k realized is a bad idea, you know, a long time ago. In just going slightly off tangent here, but just to show you that this issue is as old as dirt in game design. Let's get rid of this for now. In 40k, plasma weapons used to have a roll where they would just explode. And if they exploded, it would be like a grenade going off in the middle of your squad, which would wipe out your squad. And Space Marines are not cheap, so especially if you were playing with small squads or low points, like 300 points or something, you'd lose your whole squad, and the game would just be over. Now, obviously, it's unfun to just have a mechanic where you can just potentially lose the game if you roll badly. Then, you know, if it was Space Marines versus Space Marines, for whatever reason, you're playing that kind of game, Chaos versus Space Marines would probably be a better way of putting it. You know, and so you roll the plasma explosion and you're left with two guys, and you're like, well, guess I just lose. And then the other guy also rolls a plasma explosion, and he's left with two guys. Okay? That doesn't mean the game is balanced. It doesn't mean that is good immersive gameplay. You know, it's a good player should always beat a bad one. And a lot of the reason why in games like tabletop games like BattleTech and 40k, the reason why they put very powerful RNG in is because it's not fun. To lose all the time is not fun for anybody. No one enjoys losing all the time. Nobody. So, they put mechanics in the game. In BattleTech, it's headshots. In 40k, it was like things blowing up in the middle of your squad. They put these things in the game because what they wanted to happen was that a good player would beat, you know, someone's 12-year-old that they brought to the shop, beat him every time, and the 12-year-old would be like, well, this game isn't fun at all because all I do is lose. And fair enough, if you lose all the time, it's not going to be fun. So they put these mechanics in the game because occasionally little Timmy, who's 12, is going to roll a headshot, okay? And, you know, Paul, who has a vibrant and flourishing beard, that's how we'll imagine this guy, who's, you know, in his 40s, playing BattleTech in the store on a tabletop with Timmy, who's 12. And, you know, he might be a stand-up bloke playing with that kid because he wants him to get into the hobby. At some point, Timmy is going to roll on his, let's go with AC-10. He's going to roll on that AC-10, and that AC-10 is going to find its way into the cockpit of Paul's Atlas, which he spent all his points on. And that Atlas is going to be headshotted, and the pilot is going to be killed, and suddenly he is left with, you know, a couple of not so great mechs against Timmy's full lance, and he, you know, has the rest of his moves to make, okay? And from that point, It's almost impossible for Paul to win. Timmy's gonna take it, and Timmy gets a win. He beat 40-year-old Paul, the BattleTech legend himself. This is a person I made up, by the way. There's no person I know called Paul, and that's great. Okay, because then he's like, oh, it's so cool. It was so fun. I beat that guy. Now I'm gonna get into BattleTech. Now, FASA or whoever owns BattleTech these days is gonna make loads of money. And that's why they put these mechanics in the game, is they put these RNG mechanics into the game because they want good players to lose to bad ones occasionally. So that bad players can have victories, so that they can have fun too. So that they're not losing every time. That is, you know, that is the thing. That is why many people don't enjoy games like, say, chess, or StarCraft, or Counter-Strike, because if someone is 5% better than you in chess, Counter-Strike, or StarCraft, they're going to bury you. Every single time they're going to bury you. Okay, maybe not in StarCraft, because occasionally you might cheese, and they might not be able to, they might have been a bit greedy, and they might lose the occasional game. But that's just a sign that StarCraft is a great game. But generally speaking, if someone is slightly better than you at a high level, they're just gonna put your face into the dirt every single time. If it's a well-designed good game that compares the skill of player A and the skill of player B. Yeah. And so what they've done in this is they've just they've decided that Advent is like little Timmy, the 12-year-old, okay? And he deserves to win occasionally. No matter how badly he plays, he should win occasionally. And it's just awful design. Because one, okay, Timmy is an AI, Advent is an AI, and doesn't care if it loses all the time. So you don't have to save his feelings, and you're not trying to sell copies of XCOM2 or your trading card game or whatever, okay? So much of the reasoning as to why you put these random mechanics into games to give bad players the occasional win is not there, okay? But, you know, two, good players, hardcore players, don't like it when they lose and it's not their fault. And if it's just one game and you can fire up another game, then it's not a problem. But if I was 150 hours into this campaign and I rolled a bajillion low damage rolls and got squad wiped for it in an Iron Man game, and I did nothing wrong, I had the perfect ambush, the guys were sat there surrounding a campfire talking about, you know, how sectoids look just absolutely fine, okay? They're having weird alien sexual conversations that, you know, are incomprehensible to the human mind, and they're completely unaware of the combat situation that's going around them. And I've got a guy to the north of them, and a guy to the east of them, and a guy to the west of them, and a guy to the south of them, and I open up on these guys, and my rocket does 2 damage on all of them, and then all of my shots miss, and then suddenly 2 of them get crits and kill half my squad. Okay? I am gonna lose the plot, because that should never happen. Okay? If you have the correct strategy and the correct positioning, you're executing the correct moves, you should win. Okay? That's what makes for a great strategy and tactical game at the highest levels.
What these recruits lack in experience, they make up for in grit.
So, this mod has made it so that little Timmy from Advent can win occasionally. And that just makes for a crappy game. Sorry. Now, I would like to just finish up by saying, and we'll go back to what Leon said here at the top, because I think it's very important. He said, since my opinion of the mod is not very positive, I'd like to preface this post by saying I totally respect the enormous amount of work that's been poured into this project. Okay. And so, you know, I know players can be very full of vitriol and give very negative, degrading, and otherwise, at times even dehumanizing feedback. So, I do want to end by saying I really respect all the work that these guys have put into this mod. It's obviously been a ton of effort by a number of people. They've evidently done it for free, or most of them have done it for free. I'm sure that they've been supported on Patreon and various other places if they wanted to be. I really appreciate it. This mod is not for me because I just think it's deeply flawed. And some people enjoy this kind of gameplay where they're trying to work out the one specific way to win. They're solving the puzzle, as it were, which is also what Leon said, is this mod seems like a puzzle game when it's clearly not meant to be one. This mod is a puzzle that you have to solve, probably through many attempts or many repeats, working out exactly what the correct strategy is to win it. But also, you're gonna be replaying missions because you got wiped through no fault of your own, and some people enjoy that, but it is definitely not for me. Now, if I wanted to fix it, well, the simple way to fix it is to put reliability back in the game. So, you know, up the minimum damage levels, you know, put them back where they were, so that the player can, on missing a shot or two, still have some reliable damage left with which to salvage the situation. 2 to 5 grenades are awful compared to 3 to 4 ones. For many of the reasons that I've discussed in the previous thing. They don't want so much cover destruction in the game, just make grenades rarer. Or have a specific grenade slot that you can only have one particular grenade in, say, and have a vest slot and have an ammo slot. You know, there are lots of things that you can do. But what they've done is they've just taken tools away. And that gives you very little freedom in what you can do, which is probably why everyone who actually plays this, that I've seen, they start with a Templar, because the Templar is a melee character, and melee is the most reliable of the things that are reliable in this, although it's still not completely reliable, but more reliable than guns. Any of the characters that seem to revolve around shooting have actually lost a great deal of capability in this mod. Anyway, that's it. That's it for all my thoughts on it. I just really wanted to go into depth on my thoughts and opinions on this. You know, I could, and I think anybody could, settle down and solve the puzzle that is this mod and beat it. I could probably beat it on my second attempt now I've learned so much about it. But it is not fun to play, in my opinion. My opinion, this is not fun to play. And so, I don't want to play it. It's as simple as that. If you're not having fun, why bother playing it? So, anyway, that is it for my AAR. I hope you enjoyed this insight into, I guess in some areas this is an insight into game design as well as other stuff. I don't like to talk too much about game design, even though I actually have a degree in game design, because at least not outside of a very limited scope of people, because everyone thinks that they're a game designer. It's sort of like, you know, when someone is a doctor and then everyone's like, oh, you're a doctor, so then they start bringing all their medical problems. And then what they do is sometimes they go, oh, well, I read this, you know, you've said this, but I read this online, and my experience is, my anecdotal experience is this, and blah, blah, blah. And you can see the person who's the doctor, you can see their eyes rolling into the back of their head, because, you know, they can't, it's not their job to correct misinformation, and they're just not in the mood for it right now. And they don't want to get into an argument with somebody who doesn't understand the fundamentals of medicine as to why they're wrong. So I just, you know, not to sound arrogant or anything, but there's a whole different level between actually having spent most of your life studying game design, going to a university and reading white papers and research material on games design, and, you know, philosophies for particular end games. You know, do you want to generate microtransactions? Although that wasn't a thing back when I was at university. You know, do you want the player to be playing as much as possible? Do you want the player to just play the game, have a great 20 or 15 hour experience and then stop playing it? You know, what makes a game fun, etc. Players don't often have a full grip on why they enjoy a game. A game with, you know, incredibly frustrating losses and exhilarating highs can be immensely popular and fun, but people don't understand that between losing horribly and winning awesomely is the reason why they keep coming back to the game, because they're hoping that the next game will be an awesome win and not a horrible loss. I'm more or less describing most matchmaking games here and games like World of Tanks. But, you know, every player will go on the forum and be like, why don't you fix this situation where it's impossible for me to win? Like, you matchmake against a load of enemies that are the perfect class to beat you. So, you know, unless they're thoroughly incompetent, you have no chance of winning, so then you have a horrible loss. And then you end up in the next game and you're a paladin and everyone else is playing undead, and you're like, well, this is great. And then you're just like banishing them left, right, and center. So they're like, oh, you know, fix it so it's not so swingy. But the point is, it's designed to be swingy because it's that highs and lows that actually makes people love the game, even though when they're losing and the game is making them lose, they hate it. So there's a lot of complexity to it, and I don't normally like going into that complexity because there isn't enough time in the universe to argue with everybody on the internet about everything. Not that I'm saying I'm like the complete authority on games design, because I'm not. There are plenty of other people out there who have degrees in games design, not plenty of other people, but probably hundreds if not thousands, although it's a very big world out there. And they probably have even more insight than I do, or maybe they're older than me or whatever, or they've studied particular areas of it. But going back to the doctor example, yeah, it can be very frustrating, and you don't want to argue from authority, you know, so you just rather not argue at all, because I'm not. I have taught people IT in the past, but it can be difficult to be a teacher for someone who's not listening and is hostile to your position. So, yeah, anyway, that is it for this reflection, introspection, whatever you want to call it. I hope you guys found it useful and interesting. I will not be playing this mod again because I don't like it, and I've just spent 50 minutes explaining why. So, in the future, I might do a XCOM2 base game, Impossible Iron Man, because that is always good for a laugh at times. But XCOM2 is the easier of the games compared to the Impossible Chimera Squadron run and the Impossible Enemy Warfare run. But that might be a nice change of pace. But anyway, that is it for now. I hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you guys next time.